Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Dominaria United spoilers. So we've reached the penultimate day of spoiler season. Tomorrow we get the full set, but today we got some sweet stuff to talk about. We got a couple more interesting mythics, one of my favorite mythics from the whole set, some lore rarity stuff, another member of the Lord cycle, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new DMU cards. Before we do, two quick reminders. Number one, to keep up on the latest spoilers throughout the day, head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Number two, if you need some Dominaria cards, you can snag them from our awesome sponsor, Card Kingdom, over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Anyway, let's talk Dominaria United. So first up today, we got the return of Rith, is Rith Liberated Primeval. In this card, it's the best Rith I think we've ever seen at a minimum. So a 5 mana Naya colored 5/5 legendary dragon, it has Ward 2, and it says other dragons have Ward 2. And at the beginning of your end step, if a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls was dealt excess damage this turn, you make a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So excess damage basically means you just deal more damage to a creature or planeswalker than you need to kill that creature. So for example, your opponent's planeswalker has 3 loyalty, you attack it with a 4/4, you hit it for all that damage, it would have taken excess damage. You only needed 3, it took 4, you get the dragon token. Or maybe you attack with a 3/3 and your opponent chump blocks with a 2/2, you only needed 2 damage to actually kill that creature, so it took excess damage, you get the dragon token. And I think as far as standard is concerned, the dragon token is going to be really key to making Rith work. I don't think we really have enough pieces to make full-on dragon tribal with Rith, but if you can relatively consistently get that 4/4 dragon the turn that Rith comes into play, this turns into an upgraded Broodmate dragon essentially, with the upside that you could potentially make more dragons in the future. And even by 2022 standards, a Broodmate dragon is not a bad card, especially when it only costs 5 mana and has a bunch of extra stuff going on as well. So how I imagine you want to play this card is try to build a big board early. On turn 5, do some attacking. Hopefully your opponent trades off in combat. Hopefully your opponent has a planeswalker that you can kill with excess damage. And then post-combat, you slam the Rith, you get the token on your end step. In that scenario, Rith is a really good card. When this is 5 mana, make 9 power of flying dragons, and you have a bunch of extra upside, this card is absolutely busted and very standard playable, and we do got a lot of pieces to make some sort of Naya mid-range deck work, like Jetmir and Ginny Fae. So there's plenty of shenanigans to make this happen. The question's going to be, how consistently can you do this? Is this something where this is often a Broodmate dragon, an upgraded Broodmate dragon? Or is this something where you're getting that extra dragon token relatively infrequently? If that's the case, then I think Rith is probably more of a commander card, because as I mentioned before, we just don't really have the pieces to make full-on dragon tribal and standard work. Although I will say, if you're playing Rith, then I do think other dragons go up in value because those dragons are going to benefit from the ward. So maybe Itsushi becomes the right 4-drop for your deck if you have Rith as your 5-drop, just because it gets a little bit better thanks to Risk Protection. Or maybe Smoldering Egg gets a little bit better if you got Rith in your deck because of the ward protection. So I don't think you'll be full-on dragon tribal, but if you're building a Rith deck, keep in mind that dragons do get slightly better. I'm also interested to see if eventually we're going to have a dragon deck in maybe historic or pioneer or even modern. We have so many pieces. We keep getting more big, flashy, powerful dragons. We got good Dragon Wrap, we got Sarkins and Dragon Horde to get to our big stuff. No one's really cracked the code yet. We just played a Dragon Lord deck not that long ago, a couple weeks ago in Pioneer, and the deck was sweet. I don't think it was all the way there to be truly competitive, but we're getting closer because Wizards just keeps printing busted dragons. So we might not be there yet, but once this deck develops, I mean, a 5/5 flyer for 5 with upside that gives your dragons protection, probably a piece of the puzzle, at least is like a 1-of or something. The other thing I love about this card is it seems to be part of a trend from Wizards to add dragon commanders to colors that just don't have a ton of dragon commander support. We saw Rivaz just show up yesterday, giving us a Rakdos dragon commander. We see the new Dragon Dimir Planeswalker Savitri, which gives you a Dimir dragon commander. Rith, yes, Naya does technically have dragon commanders. You got old school Rith, you got Palladium Orc, you got Palladium Orc Ruiner, but honestly, by 2022 standards, none of these cards are really exciting. None of these make you want to go Naya for your dragons, especially when there's so many powerful dragon commanders, like the Dragon, Saya the Dragon, Miram. There's so many strong ones that none of these make you want to be like, okay, I'm going to limit my dragon deck to just being Naya. Rith, on the other hand, it's definitely better than the other options. If you want to go straight Naya Dragons in Commander, this is the most powerful commander, like by a pretty significant margin, I think. So I like that. I like that this adds a new color of dragons to Commander, or at least gives them a new powerful commander for that color combination that was really sorely lacking a strong leader for their commander deck. I also think probably fine in the 99 of 5-color dragons, Dragon, Scion, giving your stuff forward too, a nice little bonus, maybe getting some extra dragons. So I think this is good enough that you would play it in those decks as well. So Rith, it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. Standard, I'm really on the fence. This is one of those cards gonna have to play with and see how often it's a Broodmate Dragon. Is it a Broodmate Dragon often enough to be good? If yes, this card's gonna be great in Standard. If no, then it's probably straight up unplayed in Standard. In the meantime, at least it's a sweet Naya Dragon commander and a good piece to 5-color dragons as well. We also got one of my favorite cards from this entire set, Vesuvan Duplimancy. So a 4-mana enchantment that says whenever you cast a spell that targets only a single artifact or creature you control, create a token that's a copy of that artifact or creature, except it's not legendary. So this is kind of a Panharmonicon. I know I compare every single card to Panharmonicon, but this is kind of a Panharmonicon, or actually really it's like an Orvar, except in a lot of ways better. Worse for Commander, obviously. The upside of Orvar and Commander is that the Legend, so you can play it as your Commander, but in a format like Standard, I've tried to build Orvar decks so many times, and the problem is Orvar just dies to literally everything. It is so hard to go off with Orvar in Standard, because your opponents just kill it and it never does anything cool. Vesuvan Duplimancy gives you a pseudo Orvar that does a lot of what Orvar does, but as an enchantment, it's much more likely to actually stick on the battlefield and do cool things, so I'm super hyped to try to build this in Standard, although really, I think its main home is going to be in Commander decks. It's great in Orvar decks and Commander, kind of doubling up your Orvar abilities. It's really cute with like Adrix and Nev, because it gets around the Legend rule. Imagine having your Adrix and Nev, targeting it to make 2 token copies of it because of Adrix and Nev's ability, and then the next time you target it, you're going to just make 4 and then 8, and it's going to multiply out of control, and then everything you target is just going to get so wild. Or maybe Burdiclad can do some really sweet shenanigans with tokens. Cute with Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief, also doubles up your spells, even though if you're targeting your Ivy, you're not getting the Ivy ability, and if you target something else, you'll get a copy of that something else, but you won't get another copy of Ivy, because Vesuvan Duplimancy only triggers when you cast a spell, not when you copy a spell. But still, it seems like sweet shenanigans there. Like, imagine Duplimancy in Ivy Mutate. It is going to be ridiculous, copying entire Mutate piles at a low cost. And if you want to go really deep with this card, turn it into an artifact, and then you can copy Duplimancy. And once you get several Duplimancies going, things are going to get super wild. So you could try to turn Duplimancy into a creature. There's also some enchantments that do that, but the easiest way is probably just Liquimetal Coating or Liquimetal Torque. Make it into an artifact, copy it a few times, and then every spell you cast that targets something is just going to make 1,000,000 copies, which is going to be spectacular. And a lot of the cards that you want to play with Duplimancy are the same cards that you already play in an Orvar deck. Some of the cheap buyback spells that do nothing, like Whim of Volrath or Mind Game, these are cards that really don't do much. They just like tap something or change the text on something. But if you got a Duplimancy or an Orvar out, you're getting an extra copy, which makes these cards insane. Or just like Dreams Gift or Thermoflex, any cheap thing that can target any permanent is going to be absolutely absurd with Duplimancy. As far as Standard is concerned, there's plenty of things to target your spells with. We got Slip Out the Back, Tameo Safekeeping, Boon is Safety, to copy creatures, even enchantments, Radiant Grace, Cradle of Safety, that works well with Vesuvan Duplimancy too. And then we got some sweet things to copy. Imagine just making a ton of Lord Xanders, or copying Titan of Industry for 1 mana repeatedly, or stealing all your opponent's stuff with Evelyn, or if you got instant speedways to target, Obscura Interceptor can just kind of like lock your opponent out of playing spells, just keep bouncing the spell back to their hand. So there are all kinds of shenanigans. Once you get back to older formats like Muldrift or Ephemerate, oh my god, imagine Muldrifting, Ephemerating the Muldrifter with Duplimancy out. You're going to draw so many cards, you're going to get so many Muldrifters. So I absolutely love this card. This card to me has some Panharmonicon vibes. The way you make this card work is going to be very different, because you got to be able to target your stuff. But once this gets going, just making copies of your things at a really low price for casting cheaps, instants, or sorceries, or auras makes this card so cool. So I don't think this is a competitive card. I would be shocked if we saw top tier Standard decks using Vesuvan Duplimancy. On the other hand, this has to be one of the most fun cards in the set, one of the cards I'm most excited to build around, and definitely going to be super popular in Commander. Next up, we got a rare red read-ahead saga in the Elder Dragon War, and I think this saga really shows the power of the read-ahead mechanic. So 4 mana, first lore counter deals 2 damage to each creature in each opponent. Second lore counter, discard any number of cards and then draw that many cards. Third lore counter, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So if this saga did not have read ahead, I would be pretty meh on it because the first lore counter seems pretty situational. It's essentially like a 4 mana Pyroclasm with a bit of upside that can hit your opponent for some damage, but there's going to be a lot of board states in a lot of matchups where on turn 4, that's just not going to be very good. That might do literally nothing, like us damage your opponent for 2, but not kill any of their creatures. And if you had to always start there, I would think this card would be pretty fringe. But thanks to read ahead, you don't have to start there. You can start with the Illuminate History mode and improve your hand, or if you need a big creature because your opponent has big things and they're attacking you or you're trying to close out the game, you can just go Furja's Retribution and just get your 4/4 right away. So I think that the flexibility of the read ahead mechanic makes this card much more interesting. It's not a super efficient at any point on the curve, like 4 mana, make a 4/4 token. Probably not good enough by itself, but if you can manipulate it thanks to read ahead, so you're getting the best mode for individual situations, then I think this card could have a shot to see some play. It seems best suited, honestly, for some sort of token deck. We've been talking a bit about like Rith and King Darren, the 48th, wanting to have a lot of tokens on the battlefield, and this makes a token, and it's a dragon token, so it works with Rith, you get the protection award, it works with Darren's protection. We got stuff like Incandescent Area, which hasn't really caught on in Standard, but is a nice Anger the Gods effect almost for a token deck. We got stuff like Jetmir, so maybe this can be a 4-drop in some sort of Naya token deck in Standard. So the Elder Dragon War, I think it's good specifically because of read ahead and the flexibility it offers. If you couldn't read ahead, I would think this would probably be close to unplayable in Standard, but as it is, I think it's got a shot to see a little play. Moving on, we have our last Defiler, Defiler of Instinct, our red Defiler. So 4 mana, 4/4 Phyrexian Kavu. It is first strike. It has the same abilities as the rest. You get a discount paying Phyrexian mana on your red permanent spells. You can pay 2 life instead of 1 of their red mana. And then it says when you cast a red permanent spell, Defiler of Instinct deals 1 damage to any target. So Defiler of Instinct, I think this card is okay. The green member of the cycle still stands out way above the rest. This is in the lower tier somewhere. I think the problem I have with this card is it's most likely home as some sort of red aggro deck, but there's 2 reasons I'm a little skeptical of it as the top end in red aggro. Number 1 is, if you think about red aggro decks, you're really trying to curve out. Defiler of Instinct will most likely be the top end of your curve in aggro deck, which means by the time you play this, if your game plan is going well, hopefully you're not going to have a bunch of red permanents in your hand to cast and actually get the damage with Defiler of Instinct. So it's a little bit awkward as the top end of the curve. The other concern I have is we got some pretty decent red 4-drops. Like this has to beat out New Jaya, which I think is a very strong planeswalker. You got to beat out Thundering Raju if you got any sort of modify synergies. You got to beat out Itsushi. We've seen Jaxus see a bit of play in some decks. So there's plenty of competition here. Is Defiler going to be better than these other options? Is it even going to work in red aggro? I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. A 4/4 first strike is like not a bad body. I think it's really going to come down to one thing in Standard. How good is dealing 1 damage to something? I assume that you're not going to have many red cards left in hand by the time you play this. How often are you going to be able to snipe a relevant creature with that 1 damage? Like, it's nice that you can always go face and get in a little bit of reach that way, but it really depends on how many X1s are running around. So if we have a lot of Blade Onis and Malevolent Hermits and Suspicious Stowaways where you play this and then you follow it up with 1 thing and you kill one of your opponent's things, then this could be a pretty reasonable card in Standard. Otherwise, I'd probably go with the other options. That said, it is worth mentioning that this is kind of a sweet payoff, Impact Tremor style, for some combo decks. This might be its main home. I don't think we have any of these combos in Standard right now, at least that I could find, but 1 damage to anything whenever you cast a red permanent means if you have like Burgy and Grinning Angus going in a format like Historic, this just wins you the game. The infinite casting of Grinning Angus, ignore the Phyrexian mana cost. Like, that doesn't even do anything. You don't even need that. You're just using Burgy's mana to cast Angus a bunch of times, and you just ping your opponent out of the game. Or maybe you're playing like Burning Tree Emissary, Cloudstone Curio Loops, where you're just bouncing your Burning Tree infinite number of times, Defiler Instinct just straight up wins you the game. So if you're a deck that was playing Impact Tremors as a finish your trigger combo, and you're built around red permanents, so there is a restriction here, it doesn't just work with anything, you specifically got to be red permanents, then Defiler can be a nice backup to Impact Tremors. Yeah, it's a creature, but you get a good body out of it, so I think that might be its primary home as like a combo finisher rather than the top end of an aggro deck or a value card. So we'll have to wait and see. I feel like, awkwardly, now that we've seen this whole cycle, my expectations were set way too high because we got the green one first, and the green one is just, it's so absurd. Like, compared to the rest of the cycle, if you're gonna like tier rank them, the green one is like S tier, and then the next best one is probably like B tier or C tier, like fine, average, playable, but nowhere near the green one. So we saw the green one first. So I was expecting all of these to be of a similar power level, but it turns out they're all fine. None of them are bad. They all have good stats. They have a relevant ability, an ability that maybe gets better as we head into new Phyrexia or return to Phyrexia, and maybe we get more payoffs for spending life and Phyrexian mana, but none of them come even close to the green one, which is just so much better than the rest of the cycle. We also got our fourth Lord from the set. We've been wondering, would we get a Soldier Lord? The answer is yes in Valiant Veteran. So 2 mana 2/2 core soldier gives your other soldiers +1/+1, and then you can pay 5, exile it from your graveyard to put a +1/+1 counter on each soldier you control. So I gotta say, I'm actually a little disappointed in this one. After seeing the Elf Lord drawing cards, the Goblin Lord drawing cards as stuff dies, even the Merfolk Lord giving you all of your Merfolk the Curse Catcher ability, the ability to pay 5, exile it from a graveyard to put a counter on your team just isn't that exciting. So I think out of the Lords we've seen so far, this is the least powerful. However, as far as Standard is concerned, there's one big reason that Valiant Veteran might actually be the best of the Lords. If you think of the tribes we've got support for so far, Elves, Merfolk, Goblins, the only one that has a ton of support in Standard is Soldiers. So even though Valiant Veteran might not be as busted as some of the other Lords in this cycle, it has the most support. Like, you can already see this deck. We've been talking about it throughout spoiler season. You got Baird, you got Resolute Reinforcements, you got King Darien, you got Brutal Cathar, you got Thalia. The list of good soldiers in Standard is really long. So even though this might not be as busted as draw a card whenever you cast an elf, or counter all your opponent's stuff by making your Merfolks into Curse Catchers, or your opponent rests your board and you get to cast a ton of Goblins, I think that this is the Lord that in the immediate future, the short term, right after the release of Dominaria United, is by far going to have the biggest impact on Standard. The other ones were in, let's wait for future sets. Let's wait for Ixalan to give us more Merfolk. Let's see if more Elves show up in some random set in the future. But I think right out of the gate, you can build a very powerful soldier deck in Standard. And Valiant Veteran, even though it's not as absurd as some of the other Lords in the cycle, will be a huge part of that deck and a very, very good card. So Valiant Veteran, maybe not as flashy as the other members of the cycle, but going to be a great card in Standard, and I'm going to be putting together Soldiers very soon. I think the Soldiers actually got a shot to be a really solid aggro tribe in Standard. Moving into the world of value, we got Aether Channeler, a pretty sweet value-y new wizard, a 3 mana 2/1 human wizard. When ETBs, you get to choose making a 1/1 bird token with flying, bouncing a non-land permanent, another non-land permanent can't bounce itself, or drawing a card. So Aether Channeler, pretty reminiscent of Callous Blood Mage, honestly. Same stats, same mana cost, different types, but they do a lot of the same things. Make a token, draw a card. The big difference is Callous Blood Mage can exile the graveyard, while Aether Channeler can bounce a permanent, but I think these cards are pretty similar. They're not powerful based on their bodies, the power and toughness they're adding to the battlefield, but they offer a lot of flexibility. They're almost creature charms. If you think about what Aether Channeler does, it can be a Sandstep Outcast, making a 1/1 flyer's not bad. It can be a souped up Baron that can bounce any non-land permanent rather than just creatures or planeswalkers, or it can just be a Wistful Selkie, and when you add all that together, it's going to be good in most situations. Like, bouncing a non-land can deal with a big thing, the bird can let you go aggro, drawing a card is always a nice default mode. I think that at a minimum, this is a new all-star in Panharmonicon, Yarok, and Blink style decks. The flexibility here is really, really huge. If you have a way to double up this trigger, blink it to reuse the trigger, Aether Channeler can get out out of hand. You can draw tons of cards, you can bounce all your opponent's stuff. So I think this is an easy inclusion in those style of decks. Also works really well in Wizard tribal decks, especially in Commander, where you got like Naban is a Wizard Panharmonicon, you got Harmonic Prodigy as a Wizard Panharmonicon, you got Inala in the Command Zone, which is kind of another version of Panharmonicon. So just more ways to make use of these triggers. So I think Aether Channeler probably could see some standard play. It just does a whole lot of little things well and oozes value. Plus in older formats, it's going to be a blast with Panharmonicon and Blink effects. We also got a pretty good green fight spell in Tail Swipe. So 1 mana instant speed fighting. If you guess it during your main phase, your creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. I think that Tail Swipe is essentially our Blizzard Brawl replacement. I don't think it's as good as Blizzard Brawl. Blizzard Brawl, because of its indestructibility, was often the green fatal push, which is just kind of insane. But being instant speed is a nice upgrade. So if you're looking for something to play in your green deck to replace Blizzard Brawl, Tail Swipe is probably going to be the best option in standard. We also got Electrostatic Infantry, a 2 mana 1/2 dwarf wizard with trample, that when you cast instant or sorcery, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So this is kind of Sprite Dragon at home, essentially. Even though it's not as good as Sprite Dragon, I don't think. It doesn't have haste, it doesn't have flying, although trample is nice evasion. If you're trying to play a similar Spellslinger style deck, maybe with like Haughty Djinn and friends, in standard, I think this is a key 2-drop. It's going to be good enough for standard, even if it probably doesn't make it in older formats like Sprite Dragon. We also got the Love Song of Night and Day, which I wanted to mention mostly because this is like the Richardiest card ever printed. Arena Head Saga, lore counter number 1, you and target opponent each draw a card. So mini Secret Rendezvous. Lore counter 2, make a 1/1 bird token. Very Richard-esque, a fledgling Osprey, let's say. And then lore counter 3, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. I would consider playing this in some Commander decks, especially since Rita Head gives you that flexibility. Probably not going to make it in standard, I assume, but in Commander, I don't know. I like Secret Rendezvous effects. We also got the Weatherseed Treaty, which I think is going to see standard play. Another Rita Head Saga, 3 mana, lore counter 1, search your library for a basic land, put it into play tab, shuffle. Lore counter 2, make a 1/1 green Cyberlink creature token, and then lore counter 3, target creature you control gets +X/+S and gains trample, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So ramping creature production, bad pump spell. The reason I'm hyped about this is 3 mana is the going rate for ramp. Topiary Stomper, for example, and many past ramp spells. That's just the starting point in standard now for ramp. You don't get rampant growth effects. You start ramping at 3, so this is on curve as a ramp effect, and then you get some extra flexibility thrown in. So whether or not this is better than Topiary Stomper or a backup for Topiary Stamper, I'm not exactly sure. It might depend on the deck if you have enchantment synergies or blink synergies, whatever. But I do think that being a 3 mana ramp spell that puts land onto the battlefield means that Weatherseed Treaty is in the conversation for standard playability. Speaking of 3 mana ramp spells, we got a good one for Commander and maybe for the legendary tribal deck we're going to build in standard in the Relic of Legends. 3 mana artifact, tap to make a mana of any color, and you can tap and untap legendary creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. So this calls back to an old card called Honor Worn Saku, but it's way better. The big upside, it makes mana of any color. If you think about this, in a legendary tribal deck, this can be a 3 mana mana rock that's producing a lot of mana each turn. You can tap it for a mana, and then each of your legends, Cryptolith Right style, can tap to add a mana of any color. That is a super powerful effect. I know 3 mana rocks are out of fashion, but when they can be making 2, 3, 4, 10 mana each turn, that's a whole nother conversation to be had. So I'm going to try this in the standard legend deck. I really want to make this deck work. I don't know if it's going to work, but I think at a minimum, this is a great mana rock for any sort of Legendary Matters Commander deck. The new Joda, Sisay, Azeka, going to be at its best in 5-color decks where you really value the fixing. But if you're a Legendary Matters deck that's going to be able to get extra mana out of this Relic of Legends, I think this is just an auto-include mana rock. The other place that it's sneaky good is with commanders that like to be tapped. Like King Makar, the mana fixing a Relic isn't really going to do much anything because you're a mono black deck, but because of the inspired mechanic, you need ways to tap your King Makar without putting it into combat, and Relic is going to get that done. Or like Amara, when it becomes tapped, you get a 1/1 soldier, but it's only a 2/2, so it's hard to tap it in combat because it's just going to die very consistently. But with Relic, you can tap your Amara, make a mana, and get that soldier token every single turn, so it seems great there as well. So Relic of Legends, I don't think it's good enough that I jam in just any commander deck. I know some people are going to be like, well, I got a commander, that's a legend, but really, are you going to to want to tap your commander every turn. You probably want to do other more impactful things with your commander. And is your commander going to stick on the battlefield? I don't know. So I don't think I would play this in just any deck, but if you got a bunch of legends in your deck, or specifically care about being able to tap your commander without putting it into combat, this is going to be an all-star mana rock in your commander deck. Rounding things out today, couple more uncommon legends. I gotta say, the Simic one now, why is this legendary? The way it works with Domain, it's actually like actively bad as your commander, so that seems like an example to me of legends maybe going a little bit too far, because it's a legend that is like actively bad to play as your commander because you can never maximize its ability and get the value out of it. New Rata, fine little like aggro uncommon commander, and then we have just a bunch of commons and uncommons to round out your limited deck. Some of them pretty good, like Smash to Dust down at the bottom has a lot of flexibility, 2 mana sorcery. You can choose to blow up an artifact, a creature with Defender, or 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. I can see that being a sideboard card in Standard or maybe even in other formats. Knight of Dawn's Light up in the top middle, pretty good in a life gain deck, gaining you more life and having an on-curve body, but really, mostly stuff you're going to be playing in draft. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Dominaria United spoilers for today. So, what do you think? We got 1 day to go. Tomorrow we get the full set. What are we missing? Is there anything else you're hyped for? What do you think about today's cards? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll be back tomorrow with 1 more daily dose of Dominaria United spoilers. So until then, have a lovely day, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.